Number 1.
Near the small Portuguese town of Asuka is situated one of the most fascinating Ordovician-age trilobite sites in the world. It's not that the species strikingly showcased within this quarry's smooth slate blocks are particularly unusual. In fact, virtually all of the fossils found here have been previously reported from other European Paleozoic locales throughout France, Spain and the Czech Republic. Nor is the preservation of the trilobites found within the Asuka shale especially impressive, with flat, often metamorphosed ghostly white specimens contrasting dramatically against a jet-black mudstone matrix. What makes these ancient arthropods drawn from the rich layers of what has become internationally recognized as the Valongo Formation of pronounced scientific significance are the dimensions that some of these trilobites once attained. With species such as Aegigenus fortei, Hungioides bohemicus and Uralichus hispanicus reaching lengths of a foot or more, these Paleozoic treasures rank among the largest trilobites found anywhere on planet Earth, with one partially enrolled Aegigenus specimen estimated to have been 30 inches long, a world record. And not only were the trilobites of the Valongo Formation often huge in size, they were also incredibly prolific. In the spring of 2009, the revelation that large clusters of super-sized trilobites were discovered in these hilly Portuguese outcrops generated a major scientific stir. Debates discussing possible mating assemblages, protective burrowing behaviors and mass mortality scenarios dotted paleontological literature, and even the mainstream media seemed to briefly enjoy jumping aboard the trilobite train. In fact, this unexpected flood of press attention directed towards the fossil finds at Asuka did a great deal to promote the concept that these 450-million-year-old creatures were much more than mere impressions left upon some ancient rock surface. The reports seemed to bring these long-gone arthropods back to life, providing previously unknown and unimagined insight into the lives, habits and deaths surrounding a variety of trilobite species. The appearance of these intriguing ancient layers has helped provide paleontologists around the world with a unique window into what life may have been like back in the primordial oceans surrounding what was then the supercontinent known as Pangaea, the landmass that existed some 400 million years ago, before the continents began to break apart and ever so slowly assume their more familiar shapes and geographical positions. The impressive trilobite assemblages of the Valongo Formation feature some matrix blocks with upwards of 24 creatures lying literally one upon the other. Such mass mortality plates help lend additional credence to theories concerning everything from ancient planet-wide climatic shifts to fluctuating Ordovician sea levels. These insights appear particularly relevant today in light of growing concerns regarding the escalating impact of global warming upon our planet and its inhabitants. And with the entire region surrounding these significant sedimentary layers recently being designated as a UNESCO, United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, sponsored geopark, created specifically for the preservation of the world's most notable geological resources, the Valongo Formation has now earned worldwide recognition as being home to the largest trilobites in the world. It is without question one of the most interesting paleontological discoveries made this decade, said Francisco Alonso Caus, a resident of Madrid, who specializes in collecting the giant trilobites found in the Valongo Formation. Finding these huge trilobites was very unexpected, especially in the numbers that they've been found. Most of the layers that have been uncovered in this formation are barren of trilobites, as well as of all other fossils. That's why there was so much excitement when these highly fossiliferous layers began to be found. Then the sheer numbers of trilobites began to garner a lot of attention and, of course, then there was the size. Generally, when one imagines trilobites, images of small, hard-shelled creatures scurrying across ancient sea floors spring instantly to mind. And for the most part, such a perception isn't far from the truth. The vast majority of the more than 25,000 scientifically recognized species that existed during the trilobite's 300 million year reign from the Lower Cambrian to the end of the Permian were diminutive, an inch or smaller in length. Indeed, among scientists and collectors, trilobites that fall into the 3 to 5 inch range are generally considered monsters. But by no means should such information be interpreted as indicating that trilobites didn't grow bigger than that. Much bigger. Perhaps the most famous of these large trilobite species have been the Ordovician age Oceratolus maximus from the Midwestern United States, a type that grew up to 14 inches in length and became recognized as the state fossil of Ohio back in 1985. Impressively sized Silurian-aged trilobites have also been found in western New York State, with species such as Trimeris delphinocephalus attaining lengths up to 8 inches. A variety of species have been found in the prolific Ordovician quarries near St. Petersburg, Russia that on rare occasion exceed 10 inches from head to tail. And while over the decades, partial specimens, usually disarticulated cephalons, have given ample evidence of the great size that some trilobites might have attained, such as with the legendary Spinus devonian lichid, Teratospis grandis, which may have grown to 2 feet in length, complete examples of such extraordinary discoveries had been few and far between. At least before the fossil revolution that has occurred worldwide over the last 25 years. Prior to the late 1980s, when such fossil hotbeds as Morocco, China and Russia first opened their doors to the prying eyes of eager scientists, museum curators and serious collectors, most trilobites had been found in eastern Canada, the western United States, Bolivia, and Europe. These were generally small specimens rarely exceeding 4 inches in length. Few within the scientific community had any reason to expect that a veritable treasure trove of giant-sized Paleozoic relics were out there, just waiting to be unleashed into their fossil-loving hands. But then, strange things started to happen. First, the now legendary trilobite beds of northwest Africa started to produce Cambrian-age paradoxides trilobites of prodigious size. And in equally prodigious numbers. Thousands of specimens, some reaching 16 inches in length, began to emerge on the world stage, highlighting museum displays, flooding fossil trade shows, and even appearing in local rock shops. These massive specimens almost single-handedly changed public perceptions about trilobites. No longer were they fingernail-sized fossils designed for well-manicured cabinets of curiosities or carefully displayed museum shelves. Now they were often larger-than-life monstrosities designed to be seen from across the room, even if that room happened to be a grand gallery filled with 100 invited guests. Even before the paleontological community had begun to fully grasp the scope of this invasion of Cambrian giants, Morocco started to unleash its next oversized trilobite barrage. Ordovician-age asphids that often grew to more than 20 inches in length. Indeed, one particular layer produced over 30 of these oceanic monsters, many in such close proximity that they apparently indicated some sort of real-life interaction. It rapidly became clear that many parts of the Moroccan lagerstätte had served as a macrofauna, giving rise to some of the most astounding trilobites ever seen. But while the appearance of these North African behemoths made many within the scientific community begin to reconsider their views on trilobite dimensions and lifestyles, they also made these scholars ponder why other sedimentary layers around the globe weren't producing similarly oversized fossil specimens. Some of their questions were soon to be answered. At roughly the same time that the giant Moroccan trilobites were hitting the world market, 10-inch examples of the Ordovician dichelophyllid trilobite Asaphopsoides yongshanensis were emerging from central China by the dozens. And in 1998, along the shores of Hudson Bay in Manitoba, Canada, a 28-inch long specimen of Oceratolus rex, roughly the king of trilobites, was being collected by members of the Royal Ontario Museum, making it the largest complete trilobite yet found. Soon after, teams of commercial diggers in Portugal, who had been supplying the flat plates of Black Valongo Formation slate as tiles for housing since the late 1950s, began to notice that they had hit upon an interesting layer, one that was not only producing large trilobites, but producing them in significant quantities as well. In light of the amazing fossil finds made around the globe over the last 2 decades, an obvious question began to emerge. Why did trilobites in certain locations grow to astounding dimensions, while in other outcrops representatives of the same species seemingly remained within more conventional size boundaries? It is a query that still has scientific tongues wagging from Tokyo to Toronto. One of the current hypotheses speculates that gigantism can be brought on as an adaptation to a colder climate. And since back in the mid-Ordovician, the undersea location of present-day Portugal was located much closer to the South Pole, it is possible that the Arauca trilobites grew larger in order to meet new pressures placed on them by their rapidly changing environment. However, during that same Paleozoic timeframe, Hudson Bay, where Isodolus rex was found, was believed to be a subtropical tidal estuary. Thus, this debate rages on. Other scholars have speculated that much like some modern-day arthropods, trilobites might have continued growing throughout their lives, molting their hard exoskeletons on a regular basis to reflect their ever-increasing dimensions. If one can surmise that the areas in and around Arauca were relatively free of predators and no apparent trilobite eaters have yet to be revealed in the Valongo Formation layers, then trilobites could have lived for relatively long periods of time, thus producing large specimens in life and impressive fossils in death. Some scientists have also logically hypothesized that increased size may have helped ward off predation, providing certain trilobite species, which had inherited the gigantic gene, a better chance to survive and reproduce. Obviously, many key questions concerning trilobite growth remain to be answered. There is still much work to be done and knowledge to be garnered from the study of the giant trilobites of Arauca. For well over a century, Ordovician trilobites have been recognized throughout Portugal thanks to various well-known outcrops of the Valongo Formation. Prior to the discoveries at the Arauca site, however, scientific parties specifically searching for Paleozoic relics traditionally found most of these specimens in a rough limestone matrix. Species such as Nasuritus avus, Zeliscella toledana, Ilanus giganteus and Bathychelus castellani became familiar to both academics and trilobite hobbyists around the globe, but these were all relatively small examples, usually not exceeding 3 inches in length. So it wasn't until the commercial tile quarry at Arauca started yielding its amazing discoveries that a greater understanding of the possible dimensions and quantities that these trilobites attained became better understood. As in a typical working quarry, the rock at Arauca is removed in layers, Kaus said. After all, this has always been a commercial operation, not one specifically designed to reveal fossils. The trilobite finds that have occurred at Arauca have been a side benefit of the operation, not the primary mission of the workers. But everyone involved quickly realized what they had uncovered. The right authorities were contacted, and special care was taken to extract these specimens in the best possible manner. The surprising fact is that a vast abundance of the Arauca sedimentary layers have proven to be virtually barren of fossils, and for many years it was assumed that few, if any, significant paleontological finds would be made in the quarry. It wasn't until the first years of the 21st century that the layers featuring huge trilobites in astounding numbers were uncovered and quickly exhausted. Almost as soon as that special layer had been opened, workers ran into hillside overburden that ostensibly stopped their digging cold. Indeed, it is now estimated that, if traditional tile work is allowed to continue at the quarry, and layers are removed at the same steady rate that they have been for over the last half-century, it may take another 20 years, or more, before the trilobite-bearing layers are once again brought into play by quarry workers. However, it now appears as if work of all sorts, be it for roofing tile or the search for fossil treasures, may soon come to a forced end at Arauca. With the area now falling under UNESCO Geopark jurisdiction, the quarrying of any materials drawn from the Valongo Formation layers may soon find itself greatly restricted, with all discoveries becoming instantly labeled as national treasures. To further solidify its newfound notoriety, as well as draw additional tourist interest towards Arauca, the quarry has now even created an impressive on-site museum. This facility is designed to display some of the most outstanding trilobite specimens found in the area's layers over the last few years, including large blocks featuring masses of possibly mating, possibly molting giant trilobites. So somewhat ironically, just as interest in these amazing Portuguese monster trilobites has begun to reach a fever pitch, they may soon become something of an endangered species, with all future digging at Arauca possibly being brought to a grinding halt. But despite such impending issues, there are already enough of these unique trilobites unearthed to keep academics busy for many years to come. Clearly, these amazing Paleozoic relics now rank among the most intriguing invertebrate fossils on Earth, worthy of study and display in any museum, anywhere. These magnificent relics, drawn from the rich hillsides of Portugal, now enjoy the well-deserved recognition as being the true giants of the trilobite world.
Number 2.
The world's oldest crocodilian eggs laid 152 million years ago have been discovered in cliffs in Portugal. The prehistoric crocodile ancestor would have spanned 2 meters, based on the size of the larger eggs, say paleontologists. Crocodilians arose some 200 million years ago, when they prowled the land with early dinosaurs. Today, they are found throughout the world and are successful predators. The fact that they are from the late Jurassic makes these eggs the oldest crocodilian eggs known so far, said João Russo of Universidade Nova de Lisboa, Portugal. This new discovery from Portugal extends the knowledge of this type of egg by approximately 40 million years. The eggs were laid by close relatives of true crocodiles, a group called crocodilomorphs. The fossil record tells us that crocodiles and their relatives, forming the larger group of crocodilomorphs, were much more diverse in the past, with different feeding habits, ecological niche distribution or morphology, he added. Crocodile bones are fairly common in the fossil record. They include Sarcosuchus, the super croc, which lived in the rivers of Africa, eating dinosaurs and fish. Fossil eggs from the crocodile family are rarer and are often fragmented. The eggs were found over a number of years during excavations of a dinosaur nest near the village of Larinha, north of Lisbon. They were found in several clutches and appear to be of 2 different types. They are remarkably similar to the eggs of modern crocodiles, suggesting crocodile eggs have changed little in shape in the last 150 million years. It is a mystery why some of the eggs of crocodiles were found in a dinosaur nest. Crocodiles are top predators today, but in the past large dinosaurs were at the top of the food chain.
Number 3.
When one thinks of Portugal historically and archaeologically, its colonial heyday typically comes to mind. Along with Spain, England, and other European powers of the 15th through 19th centuries, it had established its foothold well beyond its own borders into lands far distant. But there is a much more ancient Portugal, one that extends far back into the Bronze Age, more than 3,000 years ago, and even further back into prehistory. Kate Leonard, a young archaeologist from Canada, had a brush with this more ancient heritage during the summer of 2016. Take, for example, the peculiar stone she encountered while excavating in her trench at a late Bronze Age site in the Alentejo plain of the Beja region in the southern part of the country. One morning when I arrived on site, the sunrise was slanting across the site, and I noticed some indentations on one of the larger stones in the trench, she explains. As I excavated this stone, it became clear that it was decorated with prehistoric cup marks, intentionally created by someone, or multiple someones, and then positioned in the late Bronze Age structural feature we were revealing. Cup-marked stones, or in Portuguese rocas com cavinhas or just cavinhas for short, are a type of prehistoric decorated stone found across Western Europe. They are difficult to date, but are certainly prehistoric Neolithic, Copper Age and/or early Bronze Age, and have frequently been found reused on later sites, as is the case at Alto do Cerco. Alto do Cerco is a late Bronze Age fortified hilltop settlement spread across 17 hectares. Today, it appears as a long narrow hill in a relatively flat agricultural area. Archaeological investigations under directors Miguel Serra, Eduardo Porfirio and supervisor Sofia Ayres of Palimpsesto Incorporated are slowly revealing a major monumental site at this location. The cup-marked cavinha, a find of its kind that remains a mystery for archaeologists, suggests an ancient significance associated with the object that has been the subject of competing theories. The curious find is not to distract from the importance of the context, however. This huge area was enclosed by a complex defensive system. A double wall of stone, fire-hardened clay and wood was augmented with bastions, ramps, platforms and an exterior retaining wall built on a disused ditch, says Leonard. By its size alone, it is clear that Alto do Cerco was an important location in the region. The site is one of the largest settlements of this time period in the Iberian Peninsula. Leonard and the archaeology team are currently investigating the interior area of the fortification. Toward that end, they have dug a number of trenches on the hilltop summit and inside its wall enclosure, a part of their goal to better understand what activities or functions were performed within it during the late Bronze Age, 1250–850 BC, and to determine how modern agriculture has disturbed the archaeological remains. The most obvious feature, of course, has been the wall itself, an ancient construction that, according to the archaeologists, must have employed a great deal of labor and an interesting technique. Large amounts of clumped burnt clay were uncovered in the area of the enclosing wall, says Leonard. These clumps of burnt clay and the locations where they were found indicate to the archaeological team that one method used to strengthen the wall foundation was to set it on fire. To set a wall of this size alight, huge amounts of wood would have been heaved up to the top of the hill from the surrounding countryside. Imagine how a wall of fire on top of the highest point in the landscape would have appeared to a person in the late Bronze Age. There is no doubt this would have demonstrated the importance and power of the wall builders to anyone who saw the flames or told the story of what they had seen. Perhaps more telling about these ancient people, however, are the small finds uncovered and examined at the site. They could relate a story about the everyday lives of the long-gone inhabitants. Fragments of pottery from the Chalcolithic to the Roman period have been found on the ground surface at Untitled Chapter, continues Leonard, but by far the most common are those from the late Bronze Age. In the 3 meters by 3 meters trench that I am helping to excavate, some very interesting late Bronze Age pottery fragments have been found that help to shed light on the activities that went on in the settlement. These fragments fill out the narrative of this site with evidence of how long the settlement was in use and details about the everyday life of those who lived there. Some fragments found in my excavation trench have small holes in them that were made before they were fired. These small holes could have been for hanging the vessels by cords for storage or during cooking. I also uncovered a small black pottery fragment that had been shaped into a disc from an already broken piece. From many other ancient examples found across Europe, it is likely that this was a gaming piece used to mark a player's move in a game now long forgotten. A similar piece found at Untitled Chapter in a previous season is the only known decorated example from Portugal. Another fascinating find was a small rough fragment with 3 indents on its surface. This is a piece of a broken strainer that could have been used to make cheese. According to what archaeologists have discovered to date, Untitled Chapter was actually part of a larger late Bronze Age culture or settlement region within a landscape that hosted other smaller settlements. Excavations at the Untitled Chapter site are ongoing, with likely much more work to be done before a clearer picture of the lives of these ancient people who populated and built settlements in the area long before the Romans arrived can come to light. Leonard's time at the location was short-lived, however. She has moved on to Scotland, where she is participating in another excavation as part of a global year-long journey to work at 12 different archaeological sites in 12 separate countries. She calls her project Global Archaeology, a year of digs. Untitled Chapter was the 8th stop on her global trek.
Number 4.
People who lived in the Iberian Peninsula between 6,200 and 3,400 years ago received less genetic input from steppe invaders than the inhabitants of neighboring countries, a study has shown. Steppe migrations thus appear to have played a more minor role in shaping the Iberian population and culture. Recent analyses of ancient DNA have revealed a lot about the ancestry of Europeans. They have shown that these people coming from the steppes of Eurasia had a significant genetic impact on the people of Central and Northern Europe during the transition from Neolithic times to the Bronze Age, as they mixed with them. These migrations from the steppe regions probably amounted to invasions, as evidence of violence from that time have been recovered, and steppe people gradually imposed their Indo-European language, which suggests there was an element of cultural domination to their spread throughout Europe. The impact of steppe invaders on the Iberian Peninsula, comprising modern-day Spain and Portugal, however, is less clear. Archaeological evidence has hinted that the Iberian populations went through a cultural shift at the time, with changes in their material culture and funerary rites. There was, for instance, an evolution from large megalithic structures, where many people were buried, to more individualized grave with precious objects. However, scientists did not know what role steppe migrations played in this shift. Given that steppe people from Eurasia have dramatically contributed to the genome of people in Central and Northern Europe, our question was what role these steppe migrations played in Iberia. In our study, we find that steppe migrations played a much smaller role in the genetic makeup and culture of Iberian people than in that of other Europeans, study author Rui Martiniano of Trinity College Dublin told IBTIMS UK. To reach these conclusions, the researchers analyzed genomic data from 14 ancient individuals from Portugal, distributed from the Middle Neolithic, 4200–3500 BCE, to the Middle Bronze Age, 1740–1430 BCE. They compared the genomic data to other ancient and modern genomes. In contrast with other European regions, they identified only subtle genetic changes between the Portuguese Neolithic and Bronze Age samples. These changes would have resulted from small-scale migration. This likely had implications for the spread of language, culture, and technology in the Iberian Peninsula. It may explain why languages with no links to the Indo-European languages from the steppe remained in Iberia. It may even explain why Spain today still harbors a pre-Indo-European language, called Euskera, spoken in the Basque region. The analyses, published in the journal PLOS Genetics, were made possible thanks to the great progresses in DNA sequencing techniques over the last decade, which make it possible to extract ancient DNA from bones more easily and to ensure it does not become too contaminated. It's still unclear why Iberian people would have been less impacted by steppe invasions than the rest of Europe. Some scholars have hypothesized that their unique geographical position at the southern edge of Europe might have protected them, but this theory does not hold when you consider the fact that steppe people managed to reach the islands of northern Europe, which are arguably more isolated geographically.
Number 5.
In an unassuming cemetery in Estremes, southern Portugal, archaeologists found over 100 burials dating to the 13th to 15th centuries AD. One middle-aged man, however, had a hole in his head and clear evidence of disease in his left foot. Their diagnosis? A foot fungus that has never been seen in medieval Europe before. The skeleton in question was studied by biological anthropologists Ana Curto and Teresa Fernandes, who report their findings in the latest issue of the International Journal of Paleopathology. The man's left heel and ankle bones were fused together, and the heel bone also has a worm-eaten appearance, with round holes found throughout. All 5 of the metatarsals in his left midfoot show evidence of destruction and irregular healing. His left lower leg also seems to have been compromised by the same disease. Curiously, the right foot is totally normal. Based on these ancient symptoms, Curto and Fernandes attempted a differential diagnosis, excluding some diseases and finally settling on one. They first ruled out diseases present since birth, narrowing their focus to diseases that can be acquired during life. The pattern of bone lesions doesn't match well with leprosy or cancer, both of which also involve destruction of bone. Tuberculosis and osteomyelitis, infection of the bone marrow, also don't match well, but the anthropologists could not definitively exclude those causes. Rather, the one-sided foot symptoms match best with majoromycosis, more commonly known as Madura foot after the place in India where it was first medically reported in the mid-19th century. Madura foot is caused by a fungus that lives in soil, so is very common among barefoot agricultural workers. In modern cases, a person cuts their foot, and the fungus gets in and produces colonies. After a long but painless incubation period, the fungus spreads through the skin and into the bone, causing widespread destruction. In ancient times, Madura foot was hard to get rid of, and amputation was likely the only cure. What's odd about Madura foot in this medieval Portuguese cemetery, though, is that the disease is usually confined to between 30 degrees N and 15 degrees S latitudes, or further south than Estremes. Can Madura foot make it up to Portugal, and if so, how? Curto and Fernandes think that the medieval climatic anomaly of 1000 to 1400 AD may be to blame. During that time, Europe was warmer and drier than during the Little Ice Age, meaning the pathogen that causes Madura foot could theoretically have survived in the soil of southern Portugal. However, the researchers can't rule out the possibility that this man got infected somewhere else, such as the Mediterranean or even the Middle East or Africa, and came to Portugal afterwards. The other odd thing about this man's skeleton is the hole in his head. It's oval in shape and right in the middle of the site of the cranial vault. Remodeling on the margins of the hole means he survived the wound and had started healing. Since there are no radiating lines, it isn't a fracture, and it's unlikely to be a cancer either. Curto and Fernandez are confident it is evidence of trepanation or skull surgery. Someone would have scraped his cranial bone in a back and forth manner until the bone wore out, causing a hole. Trepanation was practiced in ancient times and is still practiced in places today as a way to cure disease, release evil spirits, or bring the person to a higher level of consciousness. While trepanation suggests that medical therapy was applied to this man, the researchers cannot be sure if it relates in any way to his Madura foot. Only 2 other cases of Madura foot have been reported in the literature on ancient skeletons, one from Mexico dating to between 1300–100 BC and one from Israel dating to between 300 to 600 AD. This new case from southern Portugal is therefore important, not only as an addition to the literature, but as an indication that climate change may have influenced the spread of this disease. As Curto summed up for me, this finding reminds us how the study of paleopathology can give us a better understanding of diseases today. It also shows the impact that cultural changes, like the use of footwear, can have on disease distribution.
Number 6.
In an unassuming cemetery in Estremas, southern Portugal, archaeologists found over 100 burials dating to the 13th to 15th centuries AD. One middle-aged man, however, had a hole in his head and clear evidence of disease in his left foot. Their diagnosis? A foot fungus that has never been seen in medieval Europe before. The skeleton in question was studied by biological anthropologists Ana Curto and Teresa Fernandez, who report their findings in the latest issue of the International Journal of Paleopathology. The man's left heel and ankle bones were fused together, and the heel bone also has a worm-eaten appearance, with round holes found throughout. All 5 of the metatarsals in his left midfoot show evidence of destruction and irregular healing. His left lower leg also seems to have been compromised by the same disease. Curiously, the right foot is totally normal. Based on these ancient symptoms, Curto and Fernandez attempted a differential diagnosis, excluding some diseases and finally settling on one. They first ruled out diseases present since birth, narrowing their focus to diseases that can be acquired during life. The pattern of bone lesions doesn't match well with leprosy or cancer, both of which also involve destruction of bone. Tuberculosis and osteomyelitis, infection of the bone marrow, also don't match well, but the anthropologists could not definitively exclude those causes. Rather, the one-sided foot symptoms match best with majoromycosis, more commonly known as Madura foot after the place in India, where it was first medically reported in the mid-19th century. Madura foot is caused by a fungus that lives in soil, so is very common among barefoot agricultural workers. In modern cases, a person cuts their foot, and the fungus gets in and produces colonies. After a long but painless incubation period, the fungus spreads through the skin and into the bone, causing widespread destruction. In ancient times, Madura foot was hard to get rid of, and amputation was likely the only cure. What's odd about Madura foot in this medieval Portuguese cemetery, though, is that the disease is usually confined to between 30 degrees N and 15 degrees S latitudes, or further south than Estremas. Can Madura foot make it up to Portugal, and if so, how? Curto and Fernandez think that the medieval climatic anomaly of 1000 to 1400 AD may be to blame. During that time, Europe was warmer and drier than during the Little Ice Age, meaning the pathogen that causes Madura foot could theoretically have survived in the soil of southern Portugal. However, the researchers can't rule out the possibility that this man got infected somewhere else, such as the Mediterranean or even the Middle East or Africa, and came to Portugal afterwards. The other odd thing about this man's skeleton is the hole in his head. It's oval in shape and right in the middle of the side of the cranial vault. Remodeling on the margins of the hole means he survived the wound and had started healing. Since there are no radiating lines, it isn't a fracture, and it's unlikely to be a cancer either. Curto and Fernandez are confident it is evidence of trepanation or skull surgery. Someone would have scraped his cranial bone in a back and forth manner until the bone wore out, causing a hole. Trepanation was practiced in ancient times and is still practiced in places today as a way to cure disease, release evil spirits, or bring the person to a higher level of consciousness. While trepanation suggests that medical therapy was applied to this man, the researchers cannot be sure if it relates in any way to his Madura foot. Only 2 other cases of Madura foot have been reported in the literature on ancient skeletons, one from Mexico dating to between 1300–100 BC and one from Israel dating to between 300 to 600 AD. This new case from southern Portugal is therefore important, not only as an addition to the literature, but as an indication that climate change may have influenced the spread of this disease. As Curto summed up for me, this finding reminds us how the study of paleopathology can give us a better understanding of diseases today. It also shows the impact that cultural changes, like the use of footwear, can have on disease distribution. Westerlin and her colleagues considered other explanations for this little bony ball, such as a dead fetus or an ectopic pregnancy, where the embryo attaches outside the uterus, that calcified within the woman's body. But they concluded that this case looks most like a teratoma. It's not possible to tell if the tumor had any effect on the life or death of the woman, but her skeleton didn't seem to have any changes related to the tumor, the report said. Some types of tumors that are thought to be characteristic of modern societies and commonly attributed to Western civilization are also found in past populations, the researchers wrote in the study. This case also draws attention to the importance of conducting meticulous archaeological excavation in order to preserve rare but significant findings. During excavation of human remains, materials from body cavities, which may provide clues not directly accessible from the skeleton, should always be sought and recovered with care. This case in Portugal is not the first time a teratoma like this has been unearthed in a graveyard. In 2013, archaeologists digging at a Roman necropolis in Spain reported that they found the 1,600-year-old remains of a woman who had a calcified tumor in her pelvis.
Number 7.
Portuguese researchers suspect that a dozen skeletons found in an ancient garbage dump were Jewish victims of the Inquisition more than 400 years ago. The excavation team found the remains at what was called the jail cleaning yard of the Inquisition court in Évora, 84 miles east of the Portuguese capital, Lisbon. The dump was in use roughly between 1568 and 1634. The 3 male and 9 female bodies were discarded into the dump like household garbage, with no funeral structures nor grave goods, and the skeletons were lying skewed on the ground, the researchers said in the September edition of the Journal of Anthropological Archaeology, provided to the Associated Press on Wednesday. The Portuguese Inquisition was established in 1536. Its most common accusation was maintaining outlawed Jewish practices in secret. Hundreds of Jews were burned at the stake, and living conditions in Inquisition jails often caused prisoners' deaths. A proper burial was denied to Jews. The researchers said it was impossible to know for certain if the skeletons were Jews. The excavations were carried out in 2007 and 2008 during the renovation of the former Inquisition court building. Only 12% of the yard was excavated, researchers from the Portuguese universities of Évora and Coimbra said.
Number 8.
Ancient stargazers may have used entrance passages of 6,000-year-old Neolithic tombs as telescopes to enhance visibility of the night sky. This could have been a part of an ancient ritual. The megalithic tombs could have also been used by prehistoric communities for setting their calendar, thousands of years before Galileo. Astronomers believed that the ancient tombs provided a unique window from which the stars could be viewed with unprecedented clarity. According to University of Wales Trinity St David and Nottingham Trent University researchers, standing at the center of the pitch-black tombs, people were able to view even the faintest of stars looking out through the entrance. The team of researchers are currently analyzing the old graves in Portugal's Carregal do Sal. They have found out that 13 of the tombs could have been aligned with the brightest star in the constellation Taurus, Aldebaran. This first rising of Aldebaran occurred at the end of April or beginning of May 6,000 years ago, so it would be a very good, very precise calendrical marker for them to know when it was time to move into the higher grounds, Dr. Fabio Silva of the University of Wales Trinity St. David told The Guardian. The star rising may have had a big significance for these ancient communities. It is believed that the appearance of Aldebaran signaled the start of the summer migration, and in order to time the first appearance of the star accurately in the season, it was important for those people to detect the stars in twilight. It is highly possible that more such passage graves throughout the UK and Europe were aligned to bright stars, even Aldebaran. Some of the paintings and rock art inside these tombs could have been interpreted as red stars, like Aldebaran. During construction of these tombs around 4300–3700 BC, the star would have risen exactly within the band of the horizon, visible from within all of the entrance passages of tombs at Carrigal du Sal, between 1827 of April. A good proportion of archaeologists and anthropologists have ignored the sky for too long, but the communities that built these prehistoric structures would have lived under dark skies and would have been inspired by it, Silva told The Telegraph. It is also possible that the Neolithic people believed that Aldebaran protected their ancestors or was a heavenly abode of the dead. As burial chambers were thought to be sacred, the tombs could have been used for rites of passage. Some, including the well-known examples at Newgrange in Ireland and Bryn Celli Dhu on Anglesey, seem to have been orientated towards either the sunrise or sunset on the summer or winter solstice. But only about 10% of passage graves seem to have these orientations. It would be wonderful if the proposed research could identify patterns that apply to the other 90%, Professor of Archaeology at Bournemouth University, Timothy Darville, said.
Number 9.
Archaeologists who were digging in a medieval Portuguese necropolis unearthed 3 skeletons of young men who had their hands and feet cut off just before they died. Most likely the consequence of judicial punishment, the gruesome amputation was inflicted on the men between the 13th and 15th centuries in the town of Estremas, a city in southern Portugal, close to the Spanish border. The remains, along with 94 other skeletons, were excavated in 2001 from a necropolis known as Rocio do Marcos de Pommel. The 3 bodies were buried in graves located side by side and relegated to the south limits of the cemetery, Eugenia Cunha, an anthropologist at the University of Coimbra, told Live Science. The researchers were astonished to see that the skeletons were handless and footless. Their hands and feet with stumps were placed under or near the bodies, Cunha said. This is the first time that 3 individuals have been found buried in the same medieval necropolis with both their arms and lower legs severed just before death. One individual was between ages 18 and 20, and another was between 25 and 35, the researchers found using carbon dating. It wasn't possible to determine the age of the 3rd skeleton because it was incomplete. The researchers, who published their findings online June 9 in the International Journal of Paleopathology, noted that the hands and feet were complete, with all of the bones attached as they were in life. This suggests that the amputation was intentional and occurred around the time of death, while the joint's soft tissues were still intact. In addition, if they had been post-mortem amputations, the skeletons would have had multiple lesions, characteristic of the corpus, being cut up or quartered after death as a form of public shaming, the researchers said. The types of cuts and their features suggest the limbs were cut as a form of punishment, the researchers said. In addition, the cuts are similar to those seen in England that involved male individuals who had either their feet, hands or legs amputated before death. In the 14th and 15th centuries, thieves and counterfeiters were sentenced to have their hands cut off, the researchers noted. Yet severe body mutilations were relatively rare and only applied to individuals considered very dangerous, said Teresa Fernandes, a researcher in the Department of Biology at the University of Évora in Portugal. It is possible that the cutting of all limbs would represent a punishment only applied to very serious crimes, she added. The 3 men may have been punished for political reasons. These skeletons may represent the testimony of vigorous application of justice as an act of royal sovereignty in a peripheral but militarily strategic region, the researchers said. The fractures on the shin bone indicate the legs were cut with a strong blow, while the symmetry of the cut marks on the legs also suggests they were straight and parallel to each other when they were severed. Those marks and others led the researchers to conclude that the barbaric procedure was carried out with a sharp instrument, such as a sword or an axe. But in one case, it wasn't a single blow. Cuts on the incomplete skeleton revealed that the man suffered at least one failed attempt to cut off his legs. Other than the lesions in the forearms and leg bones, the researchers did not find any evidence of trauma or injuries near the vital organs. Therefore, they could not confirm that the men were executed after the amputation. Rather, the individuals probably bled to death. It is quite likely that the amputation, without any kind of assistance, caused severe hemorrhagia that led to death, Cunha said. She noted that the individuals did not survive long, as their bones showed no signs of healing.
Number 10.
When James Cook thought he had discovered Australia and claimed it for the crown in the 18th century, he was late to the party. Another English explorer had been decades ahead in sighting the Great Southern Land, while Dutch explorers had been charting the continent even earlier. But evidence has emerged to suggest that neither the English nor Dutch were the first Europeans to reach the continent during the great era of epic sea adventure and global circumnavigation. A set of maps unearthed in Australia appear to show that Captain Cook was predated by a little-known Portuguese explorer, Cristóvão Mendonça, who charted parts of the coastline 250 years earlier. Drawn in the early 16th century, the charts bear a close resemblance to Australia's coastline, and this coastline is marked with locations given names in Portuguese. An Australian journalist, Peter Trickett, claims he stumbled on the hand-crafted documents while browsing in a Canberra bookshop 8 years ago and says they are an accurate depiction of headlands and bays along the east coast, thus proving that Mendonça navigated the area in the 1520s. It was so accurate that I found I could draw in the modern airport runways to scale in the right place without any problem at all, he told Reuters, adding that he could recognize all the headlands and bays around Botany Bay. Mr. Trickett has published his findings in a book, Beyond Capricorn. The maps apparently were drawn by French cartographers from a series of Portolan maps or rough navigational charts, either captured from the Portuguese or bought secretly. However, some academics dismiss the claim that they represent Australia. Several describe a place called Terra Java which bears strong similarities to Australia's coastline, except that, at one point, it juts out at right angles for more than 900 miles. Mr. Trickett says this may be because the Portolan fragments had not been assembled in the correct way. There was something familiar about them, but they were not quite right, he said. It occurred to him that cartographers in France looking at the Portuguese charts may have become confused. Putting together the Portolan charts, many drawn on animal hides, would be a bit like compassing a jigsaw puzzle. Without clear compass markings, it's possible to join the southern chart in two different ways, he said. My theory is, it had been wrongly joined. Mr. Trickett used a computer to play with the maps. When he rotated part of one map 90 degrees, he ended up with a picture that fitted Australia's east coast. The redrawn map, he says, shows a stretch of eastern Australia from Kangaroo Island, near Adelaide, to mainland Australia's southernmost point at Wilson's Promontory, and up the east coast to Botany Bay, Sydney and beyond. They provided stunning proof that Portuguese ships made these daring voyages of discovery in the early 1520s, just a few years after they had sailed north of Australia to reach the Spice Islands, the Moluccas, he said. He believes the original charts were made by Mendonça after he had set sail from the Portuguese base at Malacca with 4 ships on a secret mission to discover Marco Polo's island of gold south of Java. With Spain and Portugal vying for control of the world's oceans and territories being discovered, both kingdoms kept maps and charts locked up. Many Portuguese maps were lost for posterity when the repository, the Casa da India, in Lisbon was destroyed by an earthquake in 1755. Australians have long speculated over other clues that point to a European presence well before the British. The remains of a so-called mahogany ship, supposedly discovered on a beach in the 19th century but since lost. The vessel was said to be dark hardwood made after the fashion of a panel door. This, say proponents of the Portuguese claim, may be a caravel or galleon, lost by Mendonca during the voyage. Some even suggest that the British, when they set out to find Australia, knew Mendonca had been there and provided Captain Cook with copies of the Portuguese charts. Mr. Trickett believes Mendonca's feat warrants him a place alongside Christopher Columbus and Ferdinand Magellan. If he is right, then Captain Cook failed in his stated quest to go farther than any man has been before me. Yet he remains the European credited with finding Australia, and statues of him can be found as far apart as Greenwich in London, Hawaii, and Victoria in Australia. Mendonca, on the other hand, retired to run a fort in what is now Iran, and his exploits remain but a footnote in Portugal's rich history of navigation and discovery.